la séance.
I call this meeting to order and welcome to the 71st meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022, and therefore members can attend in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Should any technical difficulties arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully.
Conformément.
Pursuant to Standing Order 81.4, the committee is commencing consideration of the main estimates 2023-2024. 1. Under Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, vote 1. Under Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, vote 1. Under Office of the Senate Ethics Officer, votes 1 and 5. Under Offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioners of Canada, referred to the committee on Wednesday, February 15, 2023. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour today. We have with us from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Mr. Philip Dufresne, Privacy Commissioner of Canada. We also have with us from the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada, Ms. Caroline Ménard, Information Commissioner of Canada. Welcome to our witnesses today.
There are a couple of things that I need to deal with the committee. I am going to leave a little bit of time because we have to deal with procedural motions as it relates to the mains after our witnesses are here today. I understand Ms. Sachs has a procedural motion on an individual for the committee to allow that member to have access to the digital binder, correct? And the third piece of information that I need to pass on is that we should have the documents from Madame Fournier with the exception of two. The first is the timeline, which is going to take some time to be translated. And I mentioned to the committee at the last meeting on the ATIP document, the 160 pages. The expectation is we may not have those till next week. But the remainder of the documents we should have today. Now, I've instructed the clerk that as long as they're in context and as long as they're in timeline, the proper timeline, to release those documents to the committee confidentially by at some point, should be by the end of the day today, okay? So that's the status of the documents. I just wanted to update the committee on that. Mr. Dufresne, you have 5 minutes, sir, to address the committee. Please go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm delighted to be here today alongside my colleague, Information Commissioner Ménard, to discuss the Office of the Privacy Commissioner's main estimates for fiscal year 2023-2024. As Privacy Commissioner of Canada, I'm responsible for the protection and promotion of the privacy rights of Canadians in the public and private sectors. In our last annual report to Parliament, which was tabled in September 2022, I noted that this is a pivotal time for privacy in Canada and highlighted the important work that my office is doing.
complaints and breaches that have meaningful impacts for Canadians and privacy in Canada. For example, earlier this year, we released the results of our investigation into Home Depot's sharing of personal information with Facebook when their customers opted for an electronic receipt at checkout. We found this practice to be a breach of privacy law, in part because we concluded that it was unlikely that Home Depot customers would have expected that their personal information would have been shared with a third party like Facebook simply because they opted for an email receipt instead of a printed one. Since issuing our findings, my office has learned of several other retailers allegedly engaging in similar practices, and we have reached out to those organizations and are in the process of confirming how they are complying with the expectations flowing from our investigation. Looking ahead, my office has recently announced investigations into TikTok, focusing on its privacy practices as they relate to younger users, as well as the company behind the artificial intelligence-powered ChatGPT. Children are less able to understand and appreciate the long-term implications of consenting to their data collection and need even greater privacy safeguards, and we can and must do more to protect their privacy. This will be one of my key priorities in the years ahead. My office also needs to stay ahead of fast-moving technological advances. We need to monitor and research technology so that we can anticipate how it may impact privacy and so that we can promote the most privacy-enhancing technologies. And this is another one of my key focus areas. Le commissariat offre des conseils aux ministères et aux
My office provides advice to government departments and private sector organisations, reports public on compliance with privacy laws, and promotes public awareness of privacy issues. In this digital age, the world is at our fingertips, and the price of that convenience is often the sharing of personal information. That is why it is so important that Canadians are informed about their privacy rights, that they feel empowered to control how and when their personal information is collected, used and disclosed, and that they know where to turn for support when they need it. We also provide advice and recommendations to Parliament on law reform and privacy matters of public interest and importance. On that note, I want to thank the committee for its reports following the studies on, quote, on-device investigative tools, unquote, used by the RCMP and the use of facial recognition technologies. As noted in my statements following the release of those reports last year, I welcome the committee's recommendations to enhance privacy protections, to ensure that the law recognises privacy as a fundamental right and requires government institutions to consider and address privacy impacts at the outset when developing and using new technologies, and to promote the appropriate regulation of privacy impactful technologies.
Operating budget of $29.5 million for 2023-24. We manage these resources optimally to protect and promote the privacy rights of Canadians as effectively as possible. We are also looking ahead and preparing for law reform. The government took an important step toward modernizing the private sector privacy law with the tabling of Bill C-27, which has been referred to the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology for further study. My written submissions and recommendations to the INDU Committee were made public by the committee earlier this week, and I'm looking forward to appearing before the committee to discuss this important bill. I was pleased to learn that in the recent budget, the government proposed temporary funding for my office of $6 million over 2 years to undertake more in-depth investigations of privacy breaches and to improve response rates to privacy complaints, as well as $15 million over 5 years to operationalize new processes required to implement the proposed Consumer Privacy Protection Act. Should Parliament adopt C-27, it will be essential that my office be properly resourced to fully and effectively take on important new responsibilities, especially those focusing on prevention. Les Canadiennes et les Canadiens se soucient plus que jamais de la protection de leur vie privée.
Privacy matters to Canadians more today than ever before. That is why the work that my office is doing to promote and protect privacy rights is so important. I'd be pleased to answer your questions. Mr. Dufresne, thank you. Ms. Ménard, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Speak to you this morning. I am pleased to report that my office had another record year in 2022-2023. During the last fiscal year, my team has closed 8,089 complaints. Since the beginning of my mandate in 2018, the annual number of complaints closed by my office has increased by 310%. This is good news, but it's only a part of the story. We also saw a record influx of 7,407 new complaints. This represents a 7% increase compared to the previous year. Through my team's extraordinary efforts, we have just managed to keep pace with the growing volume of incoming complaints. Comme ces nouvelles plaintes ne font que remplacer.
Because these new complaints replace the older ones, we managed to conclude the work of reducing our inventory is proceeding slowly. Despite our efficiencies and given the increased number of complaints registered, our inventory now stands at approximately 3,400 complaints. Even a reduction of a couple of hundred complaints annually will not enable me to eliminate this inventory before the end of my mandate. Many of the files remaining in our inventory are very complex. They are sometimes involve tens of thousands of pages with many exemptions claimed. At the current rate, it would take several more years to close all of these complaints.
Try to secure temporary funding to tackle this inventory, in spite of the fact that the government turned down my recent request for more resources. This brings me to a topic I raised during previous appearances, as well as in a letter I sent to the chair of this committee last week. On more than one occasion, agents of Parliament have been obliged to submit requests for additional funding through a minister overseeing a department for which the agent has an oversight role. Such requests are currently required to include language on how this will contribute to the government's priorities or other consideration that should not be the determining factors for granting such funding. Whether or not these requests are granted is secondary to the real issue. The optics of needing to work through central agencies in order to secure funding may create the appearance of a potential or a real conflict of interest in the conduct of my investigations. Dans la lettre que j'ai envoyée à votre comité,
In the letter I sent to this committee, I suggested that a specific recommendation regarding the need for an independent funding mechanism for the Office of the Information Commissioner be added to the report of your study on the Access to Information system. For years now, my fellow agents of Parliament and I have been calling for a funding model where we are accountable only to Parliament and not to the government of the day.
cannot be achieved. Several other bodies associated with Parliament operate effectively under alternate funding and accountability models. My colleagues would agree that this is not about money. This is a matter of independence and credibility of our role in our democratic institutions. We will continue to work together to press for a commitment that the government implement an alternative model that reflects our accountability to Parliament. Le mois dernier, la présidente
The President of the Treasury Board declared before this committee last month that she supports the independence of the Information Commissioner. If the government is serious about access to information and if it's serious about the independence of agents of Parliament, it should show it by this important measure as soon as possible. This concludes my opening remarks.
Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ménard. We'll start with our first round of questions. 6 minutes. Mr. Gould, you have the floor, Mr. Gould. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to our two witnesses for being here this morning. I'd like to underscore the work of Ms. Ménard. You've been here a number of times. You came in the spring and you've come back often to provide an overview of your work. And there's a word that worries me. Well, in some ways, but I'm happy to hear about the importance of the independence of your work. But in spring, we uncovered a whole lot of things. On the 23rd of January, you received a letter from the clerk of the Privy Office. It states, "Dear Ms. Ménard, on behalf of the Privy Council, I'm writing to you submitting a request under the Access to Information Act, calling on your approval to refuse to take action on requests," and I'll skip the figures. "We are in agreement that these requests are vexatory because they focus on the behaviour of a particular applicant, and which is tantamount to an abuse of the tenets of our organisation. Thank you for your attention to this request. What concerns me is that you tout independence, but yet at the Privy Council you're receiving a letter calling on you to to no longer work on a application. This is a new article in the legislation that allows institutions, not just the Treasury Board or the Privy Council, but any ATIP request which is considered frivolous or abusive, that they ask my permission to not process that request, not respond to it. That's legal. It's under one of the provisions of the legislation. I can't refer specifically to that request. We haven't responded to it formally yet, but that process was put in place so that institutions don't go do things by themselves. They must request the permission of the Information Commissioner. We review the institution's ATIP request and to ensure that it is compliant with Clause 6.1. Ms. Menard, that kind of letter, personally speaking, I feel that puts you between a rock and a hard place. The rock, which is the access to information, and the hard place is the request from the Privy Council calling on you to not respond to that complaint. In a sense, you should be going over that request with a fine-tooth comb when you receive a letter like that. This isn't your fault. I'm not blaming you or pointing the finger at you. You've been put in a compromising situation. Response. These are exceptional requests. It's highly rare that we accept those kinds of requests for the reasons you've just raised. Access to information rights are quasi-constitutional. The complaint really has to be abusive, frivolous, breach of the Act such that our office would accept it. I understand there's a lot of jurisprudence on this issue. We got that authority only a couple of years ago, and over the past 3 or 4 years, I have agreed to address about 5 out of 30 requests. It's highly rare the request. Well, Ms. Menard, when it comes to a Francophone national media outlet, are they really going to ask for something private? What does a vexatious request mean? How do you explain that to Canadians? Well, it's basically when the request from the applicants their request is a form of harassment or vexatious. At one point, there was a ATIP request, and in that request, there were millions of pages of information, and Thank you very much, Ms. Minna. I'm sorry to cut you off, but what I find bizarre, the clerk is asking for your approval to refuse to process this application. It's as if she is putting pressure on you, and well, that is my role. I play the role of an arbiter. I have to look at both sides of the arguments. Both sides have an opportunity to make representations to me, and I'm glad that the institutions have to go through my office in order to limit this kind of incidents. And this is an exceptional cases. So you don't receive these requests very often. No, not often. Only about 30 times. And it's very rare that we agree in those cases. Thank you, Ms. Minard.
45 secondes.
You have 45 seconds. No, that's okay. Thank you.
Monsieur Gourde, Madame Maynard, la prochaine intervention est pour Monsieur.
Mr. Fergus, 6 minutes, please. Well, if I could take that 45 seconds that was left over, that'd be great. No, I might give you a bit of latitude, but thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank the 2 witnesses as well for your work as commissioners in your respective fields. Mr. Dufresne, across the world, many governments have banished TikTok on their government devices of public servants. Could you please lay out for Canadians in a clear manner what the danger of that software actually is? Thank you, Mr. Fergus. The Government of Canada and others have...
Oh, excusez.
I'm sorry? I can't hear my colleague very well. I think he's using the wrong mic, says the member. His voice is a bit distant. Well, perhaps I should speak up, says Mr. Fergus. Is that better? Well, I think he should be using the other mic, to be honest. The interpreter would agree the sound is subpar. I'm sorry, I didn't even hear the question. Well, what is the danger?
Je pense que tu n'es pas capable de
On a point of order.
les deux micros et les
I don't think the interpreters are having an easy time because both mics are switched on.
On va aller avec un micro.
Well, use one mic, please.
Yeah, the interpreter did provide some commentary because I'm listening to the. So just make sure, because you're looking that way, I think, to make sure that the mic you're looking towards.
Peut-être parler en direct de la.
If you could speak into the mic in front of you directly, please. I've stopped the stopwatch.
That you wanted, but I've stopped the time, so please restart.
Pour tous ceux qui m'écoutent en anglais.
Well, everyone listening to me in English, I'll repeat my question. Governments throughout the world have banished the use of TikTok on state-owned devices. Mr. Dufresne, could you please lay out in a clear way the danger that TikTok represents when it comes to privacy, please? Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. Well, indeed, the Government of Canada and others took the decision to prohibit the use of TikTok on government software and devices for security reasons. And in addition to that, privacy reasons. That is the position that those governments have taken. In my office, when it comes to privacy, I announced that I have launched an investigation alongside my provincial counterparts who have jurisdiction, Quebec, BC, Alberta. In February, we announced the launch of this inquiry to determine whether TikTok's practices are compliant with privacy requirements when it comes to various matters, particularly vis-à-vis youth. We know that a lot of users are young people, and there is enough matter to be, there is food for thought here, and the protection of Canadians' personal information, particularly that of the youth that use that platform, must be protected. That is the aim of the inquiry. The inquiry is underway. I can't comment further as to the potential outcomes of that investigation, but it does underscore the fact that there's cooperation between my office, my provincial counterparts, and we're continuing to work hard on this file. Question: is there an opportunity to cooperate with other governments, other jurisdictions throughout the world? Response: absolutely. And the Privacy Act applying to the private sector does permit that. We do play a leadership role on the world stage with our privacy commissioners' counterparts. There are a lot of institutions worldwide that seek to promote that level of cooperation. It's important to act provincially, territorially, and nationally in Canada, but also on the world stage. There are other jurisdictions where commissioners have handed down decisions on these matters. We do have roundtables where we share trends, best practices, and this is great because this allows us to identify the trends, the best practices, and to draw conclusions to the extent possible that will be interoperational between jurisdictions. And this facilitates the work of the organisations that have to comply. Privacy knows no borders. It affects everyone. So not only does this help us when it comes to investigations, inquiries, but also the development of guidelines to prevent those kinds of breaches. So we work at all levels, yes. Question: do you think it might be useful for parliamentarians to turn their attention to TikTok particularly? Well, my focus is on my area of jurisdiction as Privacy Commissioner. We have identified one issue to investigate, i.e., are we sufficiently protecting Canadians' personal information and their privacy and that of youth as well? When the investigation is finished, we will release the outcomes. In some cases, under our recommendations, parliamentarians will be called upon to address legislative gaps. we'll be making recommendations not only vis-à-vis businesses and the private sector, but also under bills such as C25. Privacy is within our purview, and we continue to act on that. I don't know how much time I have left. You have 1 minute left, Mr. Fergus. When it comes to parliamentary initiatives in this area, and you've spoken about the importance of your work in collaboration with the provinces and territories, do you have a sense of when you are likely to conclude your investigation and release a report? Are we talking about a matter of months or a year? It's difficult to predict that. It depends on the representations that are made to us. We want to do things properly, but ultimately my objective is to conclude the investigation at the latest February next year. It was launched this February. We want to proceed as quickly as possible. We want to do things properly. These are important issues that are important for TikTok, for Canada, for children, for youth, for Canadians. I've given instructions to my team, and I've explained this to my provincial counterparts. We need to proceed as quickly as possible, but also properly. Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. Mr. Dufresne will now proceed to Mr. Villemur for 6 minutes. Please begin. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, Commissioners, for being here today. Mr. Dufresne, do you use TikTok yourself, personally speaking? No, I don't use TikTok. I can't use it under the directive, but I didn't use it prior to that either. Well, that was just facetious, says the member, and rhetorical. But C27, which will be studied soon, brings a lot of challenges when it comes to protecting privacy of Canadians and Quebecers. Given we're studying the estimates today, I'm wondering whether your office has the means that at its disposal to ensure the protection of privacy and personal information, given the new provisions in C27. Response. We got additional financial support under the last budget for the purposes of complying with C27. That's important. I mentioned that. I flagged it. It's important to do the preparatory work in the lead-up to the passage of C27. It's, of course, up to Parliament to decide whether it passes. But if it is passed in its current form, there will be additional responsibilities for my office. For example, the authority to issue orders, financial and monetary penalties, requirements to review codes of practices for various organisations. These are positive outcomes in terms of our mandate, but they will require additional financial supports, and I've asked for that, and I think we'll get it. Well, given the current wording of C27, have you flagged any warning signs in terms of the protection of privacy? Response. We've made recommendations to the Ethics Committee, and those recommendations were made public this week. In those recommendations, we said that this is a step in the right direction, but they still need to be enhanced. We've made 15 main recommendations, which in our opinion are all paramount. The first of which, first and foremost, is to recognise the right to privacy as a fundamental right. That is the message that the Commissioner's Office, that I myself have been pushing since I came into my office. So we would ask that the preamble of the bill be strengthened, also the clause that deals with objectives. Basically speaking, we want to enhance, or rather strengthen, what the Supreme Court has already said. It's a quasi-constitutional right. It's a fundamental right, this right to privacy. This doesn't mean that innovation will be hampered. Not at all. It's one of my top priorities as Commissioner to support privacy without hampering innovation or the public interest. But these, at the end of the day, are fundamental rights. They affect all of us in terms of our dignity, our freedom. And if there is a conflict between those things, well then, what needs to take precedence? Privacy. Thank you very much. you wrote a letter recently touting the importance of the independence of your Commissioner's office and that of other officers. You are appointed by Parliament to arm's length independently, and yet you rely on government funding. Is that correct? Yes, it is. Well, what do you want, basically, at the end of the day? As other agents of Parliament that are completely independent, we want a funding mechanism that enables agents of Parliament to appear before Parliament, before committees like yours or any other committee, where we can make known our financial needs and also report on the money that's allocated. But it should not go through the government of the day. Given that you report to the government of the day, you're ultimately accountable to them, is your independence, in fact, a facade? Is it, well, what I can tell you is that my investigations are independent. However, the funding mechanism does jeopardize this independence. And if we have to go to court, we have to make decisions because of limited funding. And that is why, if I need to carry out more investigations and yet there are funding limitations, well, that begs the question, are we truly independent? It would be preferable that the Parliament, which appoints me, that I'm accountable to, I report back to you, and yet, well, the Parliament should be the one that decides what the funding mechanism is. In other words, currently, you have to make choices based on the funding you get that might be different if there was a different funding model. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. So you're not necessarily saying the government is preventing you from doing certain things, but what you're saying essentially is that you'd like to be fully independent. Well, we've already testified before other committees, and as Mr. Dufresne has pointed out, we do receive new authorities at certain points, and those authorities entail costs. There are authorities to issue orders, to publish reports. That's all very costly. And we want to be in a position where we can meet the demand. I have 3,500 complaints in my inventory that are active, and I just don't have the money to properly investigate them. So I would be delighted to have temporary funding, for example, that would provide a stopgap. But at some point in time, I'd like to see a permanent independent funding mechanism. Accountability is important, isn't it? We don't want to be in a situation where we have to delay the process of complaints because of a lack of resources. 3,500 complaints seems to be an example of a lack of access to information, says the member.
Something when Mr. Villemure was asking questions about C27, you said that you sent a letter to the Ethics Committee. Is it possible you sent it to the Industry Committee?
To the Industry Committee. I apologize if I misspoke.
Because I checked with the clerk. We didn't receive it. Now, there may be portions of C27 that this committee will have to deal with. So can I suggest that you share that letter with this committee as well? Is that possible?
I'm in the hands of the committee. I think the submission has been made public, and we've made it public on our website, so it's publicly available in any event.
Perfect. So perhaps somebody within your office can send us that letter, if you don't mind, sir. Thank you. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that, Mr. Dufresne. Next, Mr. Green, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of our friends back to this committee. My good friend from the block, I think, has raised some very important questions, and I, having had the privilege of sitting on the Public Accounts Committee, would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't reference the good work of my predecessor, David Christofferson, whom in the 42nd Parliament at the Public Accounts passed recommendations under a report called Do Service Well. It was by Mr. Ferguson at the time. And the recommendation one was that the committee strongly believes that as an officer of Parliament tasked with ensuring accountability and value for taxpayer money in the federal administration, the OAG should not have to be concerned about the vagaries of parliamentary cycles as regards to their funding to effectively meet their mandate. In fact, as stated by Sylvain Richard, Interim Auditor General, it is not appropriate for the OAG to lobby Finance Canada and also possibly be in a position to have to audit them. Therefore, the committee strongly recommends that Parliament and the Government of Canada implement a statutory fixed mechanism that ensures stable, long-term, and predictable funding to the OAG. And so while this recommendation at this particular committee at that particular time made those recommendations for public accounts, with you all being here now today in the estimates, also recognizing, Ms. Maynard, that you have had in the past to receive stopgap funding, and you've just referenced the need for, interim supports in order to meet your mandate, but of course are advocating for a more fixed term process. I would like to put to both of you, if you would agree that it be a recommendation of this committee at the appropriate time to provide this type of external, stable, long-term, and predictable funding in order to maintain the independence, integrity, and efficiencies, strength of your respective independent organizations. So I'll start with you, Ms. Maynard. Do you believe that?
Yes, I in my opening remarks, what I would like this committee to do, given that you are preparing a report with respect to the review of the Access to Information Act and the Privacy system, I think that this is appropriate for the committee to add a recommendation with respect to having a mechanism that's independent for my office and for agents of parliaments. I'm talking for me and Mr. Dufresne, but I'm going to let him talk, but definitely something in those recommendations would go a long way.
Thank you. Mr. Dufresne, we'll allow you to address that question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Green. I agree. I think that a mechanism that would provide more distance with the executive. I think the challenge is not necessarily the actual decisions that are made, but the fact that we are regulating activities of the executive, and so being mindful of that potential perception. Well, is the executive making certain decisions, or the agents making certain decisions based on that funding reality? And so having it more, I agree with Commissioner Minal that having parliamentary oversight over this addresses that issue. I think it's important that there be accountability, of course. The desire is not to have agents of parliament have unilateral control. There needs to be that accountability, but that accountability ought to be parliamentary, and there are many mechanisms. The one you describe would be one. There would be others, but this would be the key focus, sort of transparency and distance from the executive.
Mr. Dufresne, is there one that you would prefer over the other?
Well, the one you describe, I think, highlights the ensuring appropriate resources. So I think, as I say, I think I'm not as concerned about parliamentary involvement in this, given our role as agents of parliament. But I think if we can have a mechanism that would guarantee sufficient funding, at least to fulfill the mandate that Parliament is giving us, that would be essential. And it may also help parliamentarians themselves by depoliticizing these types of issues and ensuring that, well, this is something that really would follow, that if there is a parliamentary mandate, there is a parliamentary resourcing to meet that mission.
And let's talk about that for a moment. The 2023-2024 departmental plan states that the office will be exploring solutions to enhance the capacity to address incoming complaints and breach reports more efficiently, so that the office can dictate greater resources to proactively identify and addressing violations of the law that are of the greatest risk to Canadians. Quote, does your office have sufficient funding to increase the capacity to address complaints and breach reports? Mr. Dufresne?
No, we do not. We're very grateful for having received temporary funding in this respect in the last budget. So that is a positive step, and we will certainly use
What is the impact? My apologies, I only have a minute left. What is the impact of not having the capacity to identify and address violations of privacy law?
Well, the impact is really increasing the risk on Canadians. If we're talking about breaches, and we're seeing this as being more and more of an issue for all of us in terms of these massive situations where organizations will have lots of information that will be compromised, either because of an error or because of a cyber attack. And so our inability to be involved in more of those and to provide advice, we lose the ability of mitigating those risks. And my goal is really to mitigate those risks at the front end so that the issue doesn't arise at all. That's obviously the goal. But if it does happen, we need to be advised early. We need to be able to react, provide advice so that we can contain this situation. So that's the missed opportunity here, where we have to make difficult choices about where we're going to be involved, and we have less of an ability to do it proactively.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. Mr. Green, that concludes our first round of questioning. We are now going to start our second round. This is a 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Couric. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and all those involved. Madam Clerk is who I was looking at. It's been a long week. Thank you to our commissioners. It's good to have you back before the committee again. Ms. Maynard, to follow the line of questioning that my colleague, Mr. Gord, asked. When I saw this letter, the clerk of the Privy Council and Secretary to Cabinet responds to a access to information request with language that accuses that requester, and in this case a media outlet, of being vexatious. That's a pretty serious accusation. If you could just expand a little bit about the process that you go through when a government department comes to you and says, we don't want to fulfill this request because we think, in this case, a media outlet, and feel free to answer more generally, is making a vexatious access to information request. Can you expand on that?
So I'm happy you made that distinction, because the Act does make a distinction. It's the request itself that has to be abusive, malicious, vexatious, unreasonable, not the requester. So we are spending a lot of time reviewing the wording of the request, making sure that what's being asked meets the intent, of the Access to Information Act. It's not abusive or it's not vexatious in a sense, but it's the request itself. The process is the application for the authorization to not act on a request is made by the department. We review it. Sometimes just reviewing the argument of the institutions, we can say no right away. It is an exceptional mechanism, because we are taking away somebody's right of access. We make sure that these representations from the institutions are shared with the requesters, so they have a chance to respond. And based on the response and the argument from the institutions and the wording of the request, we issue a decision to allow or not allow the institution not to act on the request.
Okay, thank you for that, because it seems like, and this is closely connected to the funding question, because here you have basically the Prime Minister's department that so the leader of the government would put you in a pretty uncomfortable position, especially when you've explained to this committee that you need more resources to be able to ensure that Canadians can have access to their government. It's not the government itself as an entity, but it's the government of the Canadian people to have access to that. Now, I would certainly not question your integrity and independence, but certainly it puts you in a challenging spot as an officer of Parliament and as an institution when you have, the highest-ranking public servant that is going to be involved in the passing of the budget. Now all of a sudden there's this conflict there, and I know you've expanded on that a little bit. So can you explain as to how you make sure that doesn't happen? Because again, that's concerning that there would be this what could certainly be perceived as an institutional challenge, I'm sure.
I can assure you, like I said earlier, I am definitely feeling the independence in my role. I am acting, and I use all my authorities that I have under the Act. The challenge is, it's like you say, it's the optics, what it looks like. But I am not at all challenged in my authority with respect to who's making that decision or who's asking for the application. The lack of resources makes it that the people are waiting longer for an answer, which is it's unfortunate. We currently have 3,500 complaints that are not being investigated because we don't have enough investigators. We have requests like this that we have to put legal services on, and it takes away from other type of cases. So we need more resources to be able to respond in a more effectively fashion.
I appreciate that because you're a relatively small office, an independent office, against the entire infrastructure of government. There's a little bit of an imbalance that exists there. I'm sure, Ms. Maynard, you probably listened to the testimony that the minister provided to this committee saying that, yeah, there are a few challenges, but we're making great strides. There seemed to be a massive disconnect between what the minister said and certainly the experience of those that we have heard, both your testimony, but also many who have tried to use the access to information system in this country. Does that concern you that there seems to be this disconnect between those who are making the decisions and the lived experience of so many Canadians on the ground?
I'm going to need a very quick response, Ms. Maynard.
It is concerning that there's no action plan being done or actual actions taken this year. It looks like we're going to be having to wait for the next round of review of legislation in 5 years, which I'm not going to be here for.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Ms. Maynard. Ms. Hepner, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to start my time by putting a motion on notice. This is a motion that should have been sent to the clerk, and I'm happy to read it into the record at this point. That the deadline to submit witnesses for the study of the use of TikTok and its parent company ByteDance Limited be end of day Friday, May 19th, 2023, and that the committee begin hearing from witnesses on Tuesday, May 30th, 2023. Alors en français, ça sera...
So in French, that the deadline to submit a list of witnesses for the study. Unfortunately, the sound is cutting in and out. The interpreter is obligated to suspend service.
On commence à entendre les témoins de mardi 30 mai 2000.
Yeah, Ms.
And
Hepner.
then,
Ms.
sorry?
Hepner, sorry, and I stopped your time. Something's going on with the headsets there that the translators cannot hear, especially when you started speaking in French. So if you want to do that again, just make sure that the microphone's near your mouth. Go ahead, please.
Okay. It's because I've got the translation on my computer here, and that's interfering with my ability. Okay.
That the deadline to submit witnesses for the TikTok study and its mother company ByteDance Limited be set at Friday, May 19, end of business, and that the committee start to hear from witnesses on Tuesday, 30th of May, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Hepner.
And with that, Chair, I would like to return to the line of questioning that where my colleague, Mr. Greg Fergus, left off. We had a motion, Mr. Dufresne. I'm not sure.
Can I just stop you for a sec? I just want to
passed a motion.
Sorry, Ms. Hepner.
unanimously.
I'm just going to stop
Chair,
you for a
I can't
sec.
hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to stop you for a second. I just want to make sure that the clerk has received that notice of motion. Okay. Go ahead, and I'm going to start your time. You have 4 minutes left. Go ahead.
Chair, I can't hear you. Is there something going on with my audio now suddenly?
It appears that there may be. My microphone is working. Have you got your volume up, Ms. Hepner, or can you hear me now? Okay, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can
can't
hear you. Can you
guys.
hear me?
I don't know what is going on with my earphones here. It was working.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
Okay, we need the proper headset, so it does have to be working for interpretation. Is there anybody else on the Liberal side that wants to?
I'm not sure why this is not working.
Okay, so I can't stop the meeting at this point. No, Mr. Kirk, you're not going to get it.
Hello?
Can you hear?
Any better now?
Well, we can hear you. We can hear you, no problem. Can you hear
How is this
us?
possible? You guys still can't hear me?
We can hear you, but you can't hear us. Wait. Appel de règlement, Monsieur Villemure.
Point of order. And perhaps another Liberal colleague could step in.
Fergus, are you prepared, Ms. Sachs, to carry on with Ms. Hepner's line of questioning?
Am I back by any chance? I can hear you again.
Okay, we can hear you.
Oh, no, I can't. I can't hear the,
This is fun.
the chair.
Okay, Ms. Hepner, we're gonna continue with Mr. Fergus, if that's possible. And maybe the technicians can figure out what's going on with your headset. They'll give you a call. Mr. Fergus, you have 4 minutes. Go ahead, please.
I am going to try my best to do justice to Ms. Hepner's questions. If you'll just give me a second here, sir. With regard, just moving on then to the Privacy Commissioner, I guess my question, I'm hoping that my question for Ms. Hepner would have been along the lines again of the TikTok study. Again, because of the coordination and the importance which you've accorded this in terms of working with the provinces to come up with a collaborative study, and because this is very much internationally recognized concern, is this again, it would be, I presume it will be helpful for Parliament to pronounce itself on these issues and making sure that we can move forward on having a view on TikTok.
What I would say to this is certainly would be. We are conducting our joint investigations on the basis of the legislation in our jurisdiction and working with colleagues internationally. But this committee has done studies on privacy issues that have been hugely impactful. Have made recommendations on issues, and I've commented publicly on a number of them, including privacy impact assessments at the front end, recognizing privacy as a fundamental right. So to the extent that the committee would study the issue in this respect, obviously we will conduct our investigation separately, but any guidance, any principles that you would recommend, that you would put forward, any coordination that you would bring in terms of expertise, in terms of the themes that ought to be considered and the principles and potential changes, this is always something that we look at very carefully.
So I'm going to cede my time to Ms. Sachs.
Thank you to my colleague, Mr. Fergus, and thank you, Chair. To continue on this TikTok, and maybe amongst the people in the room, I have 2 teenage daughters who use TikTok. And as a parent, I tend to go in once in a while to see what's there and what they're looking at. And I'll be frank, there are times where it's alarming. I've seen hate material on there. I've seen content that could lead to body dysmorphia, and the list goes on. And governments across Canada, we've had this big cry to ban governments, certainly for our phones, our devices, not to use them. And the U.S. is also considering to ban it universally. But I want to ask what danger you believe it poses to Canadians, especially young Canadians like my own 2 daughters.
Well, I think that we're very focused on protecting children and how we use their personal information, how children are exposed more and more, obviously, to the digital world, whether in everything that they do, whether it's school, whether it's socializing with their friends. And so we need to look at, and our laws need to be updated to reflect this reality. So one of my recommendations on C27 in the report has to do with protection of children and ensuring that we're treating that children's personal information in this respect and with the best interest of the child. So looking at what they are exposed to, looking at the information that they share, making sure that they're aware, that they have a good understanding of what's going on and the long-term implications of that. And in many respects, sometimes they are exposed to things and face implications that they're not equipped to understand, and that we're treating them as adults to some extent. We have to make sure that they have the appropriate protection in terms of the protection of their information in their participation in the digital world.
Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. Thank you, Ms. Sachs. Monsieur Villemire, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. It's always tough with 2.5 minutes. Ms. Minna, the review of the legislation, we spoke about in the past, but could you remind us where you're at with that and what your opinion is in regards to that? Well, what we've been told by the Treasury Board regarding the review of the legislation is that there is not likely to be any follow-up to the study that the government conducted and the consultative process over the upcoming months and years. It's my understanding there have been no recommendations to change the legislation in any way whatsoever, despite my recommendations and calls from stakeholders who are involved in the process. So the next step would be your report, I believe. It will be paramount in determining whether the law needs to be amended, and I'm counting on you to table a report with recommendations to do with the legislation. Apparently there's a lot that needs to be changed in the system, and I agree with that. The legislation should be amended, and in February, we'll be celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Access to Information Act, and yet there's been very little in the way of amendments, exclusions, exemptions. Well, for several years, says the member. Well, there is a 5-year mandated review, and the next one will be in 2 years. Thank you very much. Mr. Dufresne. Literacy when it comes to privacy, especially among our youth, is it adequate? Do we need to do more? It strikes me that electronic media is taking up more and more space. Response. Well, I think that we do need to do more in schools, in universities, develop tools. My office has a role to play. My provincial counterparts also have a role to play. But as I said earlier, our youth is increasingly exposed to this kind of media. In many cases, they are smart about it, but they need to be educated about the ramifications. Whose role is it to do that, and do you have the resources to engage in that? Yes, we have some resources for outreach, but we'd like to do more. We'd like to act more broadly and extensively. Thank you.
We are now at our final intervention on this panel. Mr. Green, you have 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Ms. Maynard, your office is funded to conclude 4,414 complaint investigations annually, where the OIC is on track to receive more than 7,000 complaints this year. How many additional staff members would the OIC need to keep up with the number of complaints that are received annually?
Well, I can tell you that we have done so well in being more effective because we have no more resources, so we became more efficient in doing our investigation. So we closed 8,000 this year. I think we can keep that pace, about 7,000 complaints a year, so that means we can keep up with what we're receiving if there's no increases. What we can't do is diminish the number of cases in our inventory, which stays at about 3,500 since the beginning of my mandate. We would need about another 15 to 20 investigators on a temporary basis to do that for the next 3-4 years.
The percentage of administrative complaints assigned to investigators within 30 days of being registered was 27.7% in 2021-2022. Is this a reflection of the constraints your office is facing?
Yes, the amount of time that the files are waiting in the inventory to be assigned is ridiculous, and it's something that we're working on. But without more resources, our investigators have a big portfolio, and they just can't take more.
Mr. Dufresne, the departmental plan states that in your coming year, your office will continue to engage with government officials to raise awareness of your office's funding needs. Specifically, what are your office's funding needs?
Well, our funding needs would be to have increased budgets. I would say at 50%, a 50% increase of our current budget would be required to address the chronic underfunding that we have.
In real dollars, what is that?
Our current funding is 30 million, so it would be half that, and we have specific requests for potential C27 responsibilities in terms of additional guidance, additional investigation responsibilities.
That'll have a material impact on the operations of your office?
Well, it has a material impact in terms of proactivity, in terms of volume, in terms of time for complaints. So we want our complaints to be faster. We want them. we
And
want to
the
be able to-
estimate on that?
Estimate in terms of the timing, well, we've asked for temporary budget to help us with that. We've received that, so we're going to use that to improve the timing. But it remains an issue that I want to address.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Dufresne, I do have a question for you. The Bank of Canada governor has indicated that they are going to pursue a study of digital currency. Have you been contacted, your office, to participate with the Bank of Canada on any potential study on digital currency, or do you expect that you will be participating?
I'm not aware of I've not personally been contacted. My staff, my office may have been at the official level. I don't know that. But certainly our position would be that privacy impact assessment should be done at the front end of impactful initiatives. And so that I would welcome a reach out in this respect.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dufresne. Merci, Madame Maynard. That concludes our first panel. On behalf of the committee, I thank you for being here today. We're going to suspend for a few minutes as we change up our panels, and we'll return in a couple of minutes. Thank you. ready to resume the meeting on the main estimates. First of all, for the second hour, I'd like to welcome from the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, Nancy Belanger, who is the Commissioner of Lobbying. Welcome, Ms. Belanger. From the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, we have two guests, Melanie Rushworth, who's the Director of Communications, Outreach and Planning, and Sandy Tremblay, who is the Director of Corporate Management. Ms. Belanger, you have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Please start.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on the main estimates, together with my colleagues from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. The Lobbying Act requires that I maintain the registry of lobbyists, that I offer education to increase awareness and understanding of the lobbying regime, and that I conduct compliance work to ensure that the Lobbying Act and the Lobbyist Code of Conduct are respected. J'aimerais souligner qu'en 2022,
I'd like to underscore that in 2022-2023, a record of almost 8,500 lobbyists were active in the year, with nearly 7,000 lobbyists registered at any given time. The number of active registrations at any given time grew from over 5,300 from 4,900 in 2021-2022. Reports of oral and arranged communications with designated public office reached a record high at over 30,500 communications. We reached more than 700 stakeholders through approximately 80 presentations. In addition to the file that we had carried over, we initiated 29 preliminary assessments and determined that no further action was required in 24 cases. We initiated 3 investigations and made 1 referral to the RCMP. Priorities for the current fiscal year include the continuous improvement of the registry of lobbyists. This work always aims at making it easier to input and find information about registered lobbying. We also plan to provide more search reports and statistics in the registry. On the education front, we will work to ensure that lobbyists understand the updated Lobbyist Code of Conduct that should come into force this summer. We are also developing ways to expand awareness and understanding of the Act. This includes using stakeholder feedback to help focus our educational activities and reach an even greater number of individuals. This year, we will also refine our guidance on the application and enforcement of the Lobbying Act, such that stakeholders have access to clearer and more comprehensive information. As for our work in compliance, the Lobbying Act requires that an investigation be conducted when I have reason to believe that it is necessary to ensure compliance. We are advancing on 37 ongoing files, of which 33 are preliminary assessments and 4 are investigations. When I have reasonable grounds to believe that an offence has occurred, I refer the matter to the appropriate police authority and suspend the matter. At the conclusion of the investigation, my findings are reported to Parliament.
delivers on its mandate and fulfills its corporate functions through the invaluable work of a small number of dedicated employees, which has recently averaged 28 staffed positions. My total annual budget is approximately $5.5 million. Roughly $4 million goes to salaries and benefits for 33 full-time employees, leaving an operating budget of $1.5 million. About $700,000 of that operating budget is spent to obtain services such as HR and information technology management from other government institutions. This is a very small budget envelope. It provides a little flexibility to reallocate resource or to hire additional employees. Many people in our office hold multiple responsibilities, and even at 33 positions, we do not have adequate depth or backup, in particular when we encounter new corporate responsibilities or plan innovations to better deliver on our mandate. Despite this challenge, we foster an exceptional work environment through career development, employee retention efforts, and mental health initiatives. I was very pleased that the office was identified in Budget 2023 to receive an additional $400,000 ongoing. This will give us the flexibility to hire 4 additional indeterminate staff to help alleviate somewhat the depth of capacity risks. If our submission to the government is approved, we should receive these funds in late fall. I would like to conclude by thanking each and every employee of the office. They know how I am grateful for their dedication, professionalism, and excellence in delivering on our mandate. Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you, and I will welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Belanger. I'm now going to cede the floor to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner's Office. I'm not sure. Sandy, I see your microphone on. Please go ahead. You have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
J'aimerais tout d'abord commencer.
I'd like to start by thanking you for the invitation to speak with you today to highlight the achievements of the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner over the past year and the plans for the year forward. My name is Sandy Tremblay, Director of Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer for the Office. I'm joined today by Melanie Rushworth, Director of Communications, Outreach and Planning, who is responsible for Parliamentary Affairs. On the administration side, the office has 51 full-time employees and had a budget last fiscal year of $8.1 million. While we met our mandate with this allocation, a reallocation exercise was completed to help ensure resources were prioritised to programming, with a focus on supporting advisory services and awareness building. To this end, former Commissioner Mario Dion requested slightly less than $200,000 this fiscal year, which is about 2% of our budget.
$0.3 million budget for the office is for salaries. It's about a little over 80%. From an information technology standpoint, 65% of the professional services budget provides for an IT agreement for support and development from the House of Commons administration. Part of the work that we have been undertaking with their expertise in the past 2 fiscal years is to develop a new system which will consolidate the declaration portal, the case management system, and the public registry, including the ability to securely receive financial documents. When complete, the new system will be rolled out with appropriate internal and external educational materials to aid in a successful transition. We anticipate being in a position later this fiscal year to present the new forms under the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons that underpin the system to proc for its approval. Le commissariat cherche à montrer au public et au Parlement.
The Commissioner, the Office aims to instill confidence among the public and Parliament that the duties and functions assigned to it under the Parliament of Canada Act are fulfilled, that allocated funds are used responsibly and efficiently, and that it is a trusted steward of public resources. I'll now turn to Melanie Rushworth to address some of the work that we do which regulates with regulatees and the public.
Functions of the office is demonstrated in its commitment to providing timely, expert advice to regulatees, such as public office holders and members of the House of Commons. A team of advisors provides confidential, one-on-one advice, which has been instrumental in preventing conflicts of interest before they arise, in promoting responsible decision-making, and in safeguarding the public's interests. This group has been stretched, as the number of regulatees has grown by 6% in the last 5 years, or by 178 people. This growth is, in fact, 15% of an increase in reporting public office holders, which is the group that requires the most interaction with an advisor as part of the initial compliance process. The reallocation of funds has added 1 more full-time employee to this team. With intention to ensure that regulatees better understand the requirements of the Conflict of Interest Act and the Code, the Office has expanded its educational programs. The first step were 2 important surveys that were undertaken in 2022. One for all public office holders and a second tailored to members of the House of Commons. The response rate for each of these surveys was 30% and 43% respectively, which have provided good insight for our planning. Recognizing the importance of proactive measures, the Office has implemented initiatives at preventing conflicts of interest by educating regulatees about their obligations. It aims to foster a culture of integrity and ethical behavior throughout the tenure of all regulatees, with further learning reinforced during initial compliance meetings and with ongoing discussions with a personal advisor. Anticipating the changes to the code that pertain to education, former Commissioner Dion prioritized funds for this fiscal year to prepare to provide individualized mandatory training for members within the first 120 days of their confirmation of election. And one of the notable accomplishments of the office has been its dedication to the publication of reports and related investigations into potential conflicts of interest in a timely manner. All reports by former Commissioner Dion were completed within a year, and last year as Commissioner, 5 reports were published. Les travaux accomplis au cours de la dernière année ont bien placé.
Given the work over the past year, the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is well positioned moving forward. We welcome any questions you might have about the office.
For your statement. Just a reminder to the committee, we've got some things that we need to dispose of at the end of the meeting. Mr. Kirk, or Mr. Barrett, you're up for 6 minutes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry, I had Mr. Kirk on here. Go ahead. So I'm going to stick to the timelines. That's the point I was making. Thanks. Go ahead, Mr.
Okay,
Barrett.
thanks, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here today. Commissioner Belanger, nice to see you again. I have a couple quick questions for you. What would your reaction be if the government cut your salary by $110,000? Do you think that that would send a message of support for transparency and the service that your office provides?
I'm going to hope that that never happens. That's the first thing I'm going to say. I would fight, and I would fight greatly if that were to ever happen. I don't see that that will, because I was just in the budget of 2023, but that would have a very serious impact, not only on our work, but on the morale of the team, which to me is absolutely important. I've got the most dedicated employees, and that would be really tough. So
Right.
I hope that never happens.
Yeah, I think that proposing a cut to a commissioner's salary signals future cuts to the budget and not an eye on the important work that our independent officers of Parliament do. So, and I thank your staff and the staff here on behalf of the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner's Office as well. Commissioner, how many investigations have you referred to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police?
In the past year, 1.
Okay.
Currently, they have 5 suspended files. They have 5 files currently in their hands that I have referred.
And what's the oldest of those 5 files?
Of those 5 files, there's one that dates back to 2019. They have returned to me some files that I had referred in the year 2018.
Are you able to tell the committee what is the subject of those referrals?
I can't, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. To the folks from the Ethics Commissioner's Office, Ms. Tremblay, Ms. Rushworth, thank you for being here. Is your office at this time able to fully administer the Conflict of Interest Act?
Thank you very much for that question. There's 2 parts to my response to that. There's absolutely certain things that we cannot do at this time. Those are things like post-employment waivers for public office holders, administrative monetary penalties, and moving forward with investigations. On the other hand, what the office absolutely can do is continue to provide dedicated one-on-one advice to all of the regulatees who must remain in compliance with the Act and the Code, even in the absence of a commissioner.
Yeah, and that's those ongoing services that are being provided are, of course, essential. Members right now are going through their annual disclosure process, and so I know that I appreciate and rely on the help of the office. So you said you're not able to initiate an investigation. Are you able to initiate an investigation of your own volition, or are you not able to do it either by request by a member or on your own undertaking?
The authority to initiate an investigation rests with the commissioner.
Are you able to issue a report setting out facts in question as well as your analysis and conclusions in relation to requests for investigation?
That is not something we would be able to do because the analysis conclusions would rest with the commissioner.
Are you able to refer investigations or any findings of the office to the Speaker of the House of Commons at this time?
I'm not aware of the obligations in that respect, but I cannot imagine that we'd be able to do that without the commissioner, but that would be a conversation we would have with the Speaker if the need arose.
Are you able to summon witnesses, requiring them to give evidence orally in writing on oath, or if they're persons entitled to affirm in civil matters on affirmation and to produce any necessary documents or other materials that you consider necessary?
Those types of requests would be something that would be within an investigation process, and that would be at the direction of the commissioner.
Okay. So there is though there are a range of services that you're able to provide to members, and based on my experience, you're doing so ably and as well as ever. There are several functions of the office that are not able to be executed at this time due to the ongoing vacancy in the commissioner's position. Is that correct?
That is correct, but I will say that any matter that is brought to the attention of a commissioner can be looked at. Any matter that is up to 10 years old can be looked at by the commissioner, and a commissioner has 5 years from the time with which that information became known to that person as the commissioner to act on it.
So there'll be potentially there would be work on the desk of an incoming commissioner. It doesn't stale date in the intervening period.
Correct. The same applies if there was something that would be a decision to take on administrative monetary penalty, post-employment waivers, the ability to reimburse blind trust fees, that type of thing. All of those things would be held for the future commissioner.
But for now, if I as a member referred an issue to you, or if the experts in your office observed something that likely was viewed as a violation of the Act, there would be no investigation initiated, and that essential transparency function for Canadians would not be provided at this time.
The ability to launch an investigation, a future commissioner has up to 5 years after the information is brought forward to them to be able to do that. And in the interim, the office is absolutely still paying attention to the roles and responsibilities of all regulatees to follow both the Act and the Code.
Take notes, keep receipts. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett, Ms. Rushworth. Mr. Baines, I've got you for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for joining us today. On my first question, I'd like to go to Madame Belanger. Do you have any updates on the lobbying code of conduct you wish to share with the committee?
Yes. Well, first of all, I will thank the committee for the work that it did on this code. You will have noticed that it was very polling on some of the issues, and what I can tell you is that I've considered all the recommendations. I have completed my review, I've finalized it, and I have sent it to the Gazette to be published. The Gazette has told me that they're aiming to publish it on May 27th. And so, and the timing is good because I knew you were all away the week before, so what I'll do is I'll write to the committee and confirm when I know for sure that it is going to be tabled May 27th for an effective date of July 1st. So there'll be plenty of time for people to look at it and react.
Okay, and in the 2023-2024 departmental plan of the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, it is indicated that additional funds were allocated to your organization in that year, in 2022 to 2023 year, but that your organization did not expect to be able to staff all vacant positions before the end of March of 2023. Were those positions filled by the end of the fiscal year?
We're missing still one. It's in the IT. We received that money to hire in IT and information management. There's one position we have yet to staff. We're looking for an expert in Java language, and I know nothing about IT, but I understand that that's hard to find. So we're still working, but we are hopeful that by the fall we'll have someone in place.
Okay, and when the new lobby code comes into effect, will it apply to those who left prior to the new code taking effect, or will they be grandfathered into the old system?
Well, the code applies to at the time that you lobby. So it will apply as of July 1st, moving forward to those who have lobbied. Anything that happened prior would be subject to the old code, but it's at the time of the lobbying activity, so it will be based on the circumstances of the time. We are going to be issuing some information and guidance to make sure that lobbyists understand the transition properly.
So the new code takes effect in the fall. They would then have a 24-month cooling off period and not the compulsory 4 to 5 as before?
I'm sorry. The code would be applicable as of July 1st.
Okay.
Yes.
what are the rules around lobbying after someone was no longer a public office holder?
When a former designated public office holder leaves office, they cannot lobby for 5 years. There is a small gap if you work for a corporation that you can lobby up to 20% of your time. And if that person is a senior official, it's complicated. Then they end up in the registry, and then they are subject to the code. But unless you're on the registry of lobbyists, you're not subject to the code. And anyone who leaves public office is subject to a 5-year restriction. And if anyone ever decides to leave office, I encourage you to call my office to understand the rules, because they're complicated.
Okay, so rules around accepting to work with someone you previously dealt with in your position as a public office holder. So what are those rules?
Yeah, so anyone who leaves office is prohibited from communicating with public office holders. So they simply can't communicate unless they fall into a category. Going to work with someone that you have dealt with before comes from the post-employment rules of my colleague's office. So if you don't mind, I will pass the baton.
Sure.
Thank you very much for that, Madame Belanger. So the post-employment rules underneath the Conflict of Interest Act apply for a period of 1 year for reporting public office holders and for a period of 2 years for ministers. There's also a series of rules that do apply for life to all public office holders.
Okay, and maybe I'll stay with you on the last question here. Some of your provincial counterparts have a dual mandate, that of registrar of lobbying and of conflict of interest and ethics commissioner. Would you see any benefits, financial or otherwise, in merging the two federal offices into one?
I think that would be a question that would be appropriate for a future commissioner to answer.
Okay, and that is all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. Monsieur Villemere, pour.
6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thanks for being back, Ms. Belanger. Ms. Belanger, we've corresponded a lot recently. I was wondering, the code of conduct for lobbyists is being considered, but are we at a point where we should be considering an overhaul of the Act? Response, yes. In fact, since 2017, we should have been doing a review in 2022, 2017, and now we're in 2023, and there doesn't seem to be one on the horizon. So absolutely, I do believe it's high time that there be a review of the code. The code of conduct's weaknesses, weak spots, are due to the weak spots in the legislation. There are a lot of lobbyists that don't need to be on the registry of lobbyists, and that needs to be addressed, that particular problem. I'm here to help you if ever you do decide to review the legislation. I think that's an excellent idea, and we could call that the Mackenzie Clause, could we, perhaps? Now, in terms, what are the two main things that need to be addressed in any review of the legislation? First, organizations and corporations have to meet a threshold, and everyone must be under the threshold. There's a lot before you reach that threshold. 32 hours of lobbying per month before one has to register as a lobbyist for the registry, and that's far too high. So I think there should be an automatic opting in unless certain criteria are met. So they automatically appear on the list. Now, the other thing that needs to be addressed is the information that we disclosed in the registry. I think that there should be more detail, contextual detail and information, particularly when it comes to monthly communications. We know which public office holders were at the meeting, but we don't know which lobbyists were at the meeting, and there are gaps, and it's high time that we plug those gaps. When does that was legislation originally enacted? 2008. Have there been many amendments or reviews, rather, since 2008? No, there haven't been. There have been reviews, but there have been no amendments made. There's been no major overhaul then, no. So it's high time, and it's well overdue. Yes, absolutely. Now, tell me, in Parliament, we're discussing the relevance of a foreign agents registry. Now, based on your experience in that realm, could you tell us what you think about that? Absolutely. Well, any tool that promotes transparency is something that I will stand behind and support. I think it's a good thing. However, based on my experience with the registry, the objectives of any registry must be clear so that it's successful, as well as the parameters. I don't know what the design of the Foreign Agents Registry will be. It needs to be clear, as the criteria need to be clear. No threshold, because it's all too easy to fall under the threshold, and there needs to be enforcement mechanisms. If you really want to ensure that the Act and the registry is adhered to, well, that needs to be there. Of course, there'll be some overlap between the registries, and I'll be keeping a close eye on that. Some folks will have to register for both registries. Would it be a good idea for it to fall under the purview of one single authority? Whether it's a lobbyist registry or a foreign agents registry, we're talking about apples and apples, aren't we? Well, it depends. For example, the Foreign Influence Registry, if it included all activities, including communications with Canadians, that's not lobbying. And the Lobbying Act acknowledges that lobbying is a legitimate act. So you have to look at the objectives and the raison d'etre of the registry. Of course, the authority needs to have the powers to conduct investigations abroad. I can guarantee you that I don't have those resources, and I don't have the staff to do so. Now let's talk about budgetary independence, if we could. Just like the other commissioners, you're appointed independently by Parliament. Do you enjoy budgetary independence? No, I don't. Would you like to have that? Yes, absolutely. And I can tell you that since 2007, 2008, I've been working with agents of Parliament, and this has been an ongoing dialogue. It dates back many years. 20 years ago, this committee stated that there should be budgetary independence. I absolutely believe that it should be independent. I was glad to receive money, but I didn't get what I asked for. So my answer is yes. Are there any still open positions? Yes, there are about 28 positions, and I should have 32 full-time equivalents. And with the money that I've been given, I'll be employ 4 more FTEs. But I don't have any depth. I have 1 employee per position, and it's tough. It's really tough to fill positions at this particular juncture. Well, obviously, there's a labour shortage, but you have to make choices that are difficult that you wouldn't have to grapple over if you were fully independent. Is that correct? Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Villemure.
Mr. Green, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. The Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, you've published 6 investigation reports since 2017, the latest one in 2021. Does the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying financial resources have an impact on the number of investigations it conducts?
Here's what I'll say. The resources that I have do not impact on how many I conduct. It's the speed at which and the efficiency is a little bit not as fast as I would like to, but we look at everything. I have never been resource-oriented, so I make sure that we look at all the files, but obviously if we had more people, we could probably turn them around a little faster.
So the departmental plan states that in 2022, your office identified the depth of capacity as your primary risk for your organization. Can you expand on this?
Yes, absolutely. We have a pretty big mandate, the registry, education, and compliance. And I have, up until that budget in 2021, the budget had never changed since 2008, and it's always been 28 employees. The number of lobbyists, and therefore the number of calls our office gets, keeps going up. The number of investigations and compliance work keeps going up. And the corporate demands coming from the center keep going up. There are all sorts of reports and plans that we need to do, and we always were at 28 employees. So we actually commissioned an outside firm to look at our office, and depth of capacity is a problem. When somebody goes away, the files stay on their desk because I have no backup, No backup in policy, no backup in communications, no backup in any position. And so it's hard. It's hard. But my goodness, I have employees that believe in what they do and they're willing to do more than their job description. And that's a good thing because they wouldn't survive in an office of 28 with the mandate that we have.
Well, I might suggest, as a guy who's pretty supportive of unions, that their collective bargaining work be protected with adequate compensation and the adequate scope of their roles. You've submitted a budget proposal to the government to add 7 full-time positions. What responsibilities and operations would these 7 full-time staff members undertake?
So the 7 requests that I had made, I received in the budget, it's 400. So it's half of what I had asked for. So the 4 positions that I am looking to fill are really in my public affairs policy shop, to have a backup in policy, a backup in communications, editor, writer type of person, and then a position in the corporate, because right now I've got an executive director who's in charge of corporate, and I have no one helping him with access to information and HR, and so this person would be in that role. So those are the positions right now that we would be looking for.
Just so I make sure that there's nothing lost in the nuances of a word, when you say backup, is it that you mean that there's enough work for 2 workers? Because if there's enough work for 2 workers, I wouldn't necessarily consider them backup, because when I hear backup, I think redundant. And so would it be an expansion of the roles? Because I hear in your presentation, Ms. Bellinger, that you really support your workers and you know they're working hard. So can you just clarify that backup might not be appropriate?
Yeah, and I hear you, and I think, and I do not want to talk about redundancy, and it's maybe not but backup in the sense that when someone is away, the work stops. That's the type of backup I'm talking about. Is there enough work for 2? Yes, there's enough work for 3 or 4. But we make choices. We make choices.
If you had the 4 other positions, what would they be?
Those are the position. It would be a second position in communications, a second position in policy.
Sorry, I meant you requested 7, but you only got 4.
Yes. So the 4 are those.
So what would the other 3 be?
The other 3 would have been in one person in finance and the other 2 in investigations, compliance work.
And how much would those 2 additional compliance support workers have provided in terms of the flexibility of your operational plan?
Well, I think we've got right now 37 ongoing files that we're splitting between 3 people. So obviously, if I would be able to add 2 more, I would be able to spread the wealth a little bit better. The problem right now with my compliance work, and the reason why I chose not to fill those positions, is that we've got a number of vacancies. And so I figured I might as well fill up those vacancies first and see how that goes, and then in the future we may ask for more.
So the departmental plan states that due to your office's limited budget, you don't have the flexibility to devote a fixed percentage of program funds to innovation in program design and delivery. What is the impact of this limitation on your organization?
Probably that I feel that we're often very reactive instead of being able to be proactive. I have an education mandate. We get asked a lot to do a lot of presentations, but I want to be out there and reaching out to organizations, but when I've only got one person doing it all. So I think that's the impact, and I've got staff that are so innovative and have great ideas, and then we go, but who's going to do it? And so I think that's why that to me is the, sorry.
Is there a logic that if you had more outreach and more education, you might actually have less complaints and less investigations? Is that a safe?
Possibly. I'm hoping that there'd be more individuals ensuring that they register when maybe they should be and they don't know that they should be. So yes, maybe it would have an impact on compliance. But when you think that there's, at any given time, 7,000 lobbyists, and I've got 37 compliance files. I mean, in general, people are abiding by the rules.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you.
Ms. Belanger. That concludes the first round. We should have time for 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5, and we are going to start with Mr. Kirk because we're going to need some time at the end to deal with some matters. Go ahead, Mr. Kirk, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Appreciate you you coming before the committee. To the folks from the Conflict of Interest Office, you know, I think one of the concerns, and Mr. Barrett had highlighted some of these things, but when it comes to the commissioner being the one that pulls the trigger on launching an investigation, and then the other various aspects of what that looks like, have over the course of the last number of months there been, you know, those files put on the commissioner's desk saying, hey, this needs to be looked into more closely, or this may warrant an investigation? You know, I've worked with, as all MPs, with folks from your office, been very pleased and have appreciated the services that you provide. But have there been those files that have been placed on the desk of what will be the future commissioner and say, yep, that's something that needs to be looked into?
As a general rule, the office doesn't talk about investigations before while they're underway or before they're launched. We do wait until there is a report published at the end of an investigation process. But I will say that the office absolutely continues to pay attention to the work that is being undertaken and media queries at different places that we look for information that could be of interest to a future commissioner. But the work absolutely, it continues for us to make sure that people are remaining in compliance with the Act and the Code. Thank you.
And I appreciate that, but it certainly seems to be, you know, there seems to be a wall that's been built from the ability of being able to actually see the important work that the commissioner's role is able to do. So it's I think it highlights the importance of ensuring for the fact that Canadians need to be able to trust their institutions. Ms. Belanger, appreciate you coming back, and I know you've been here a number of times. You referenced a little bit about the Foreign Agents Registry. You know, if you're lobbying in Canada on behalf of a grocery store or a food bank or any number, and I know that folks can go online and search through the lobbyists registry, and there's interactions with public office holders and ministers and the whole deal. There's a ton of information there. You know, it seems to me, and certainly I've heard from many of my constituents, that think that the idea of a foreign agents registry, where that if you're in Canada and working on behalf of a foreign state, and particular, you know, a hostile foreign state to Canada's interests, that seems to be a pretty common sense thing, that there would be a mechanism in place. Now, I know you were asked a couple questions about that before, but I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand on what your thoughts are in that regard.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a great believer in transparency. So if the registry helps any type of transparency with respect to anyone, foreign agents coming into Canada to do whatever they want to do. The registry currently, though, for lobbying, if someone is the scenario that you have just provided, they would be required to register on the registry of lobbyists if they're communicating on behalf of a foreign agency. So we do have on our registry currently some consultants who are representing foreign countries on our registry. So there will be an overlap. But as I was saying, I think the registry for foreign influence, it will have to, the object, or what's the purpose, or what's the success of that registry will depend on how it's designed and what is it aimed to want to cover. Is it just communications with all of you? Is it communications with Canadians? And what are the requirements? And there will have to be no thresholds. The requirements will need to be very clear, because there will be a lot of organization, corporations, individuals who will go under the radar if there is a threshold. There should be as well enforcement mechanisms and strict sanctions.
If I could only, because my time is quickly disappearing. You know, there are examples of other states, including some of our allies, that have models that we could look at. Could you maybe, because the lobbyist registry, it's different, but there are similarities. So I'm wondering if you could maybe comment in your work if there's somewhere we could look to say, hey, that's a best practice that we could maybe model after.
Okay, well, the first thing I will say is I'm not a national security expert. I know my registry, that's it. Having looked a little bit and having sat on panels actually with individuals who deal with the American And having looked at the Australian registry, I think there would be an advantage to communicating with those individuals to see what are the pros and the cons of the registry, because I have heard that in the US, for example, it speaks of agent, while in Australia we're talking about activities, even activities are trying to influence Canadians. So there are goods in those registries that exist, and I think it would be good for anyone to study them, but I'm certainly not the expert.
Thank you, Madame Belanger. Mr. Kirk, Mr. Fergus, you're up for 5 minutes.
Super, merci, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank Ms. Belanger, Ms. Rushworth, and Ms. Tremblay for their attendance today. Ms. Rushworth, I have a question for you, or perhaps Ms. Tremblay, I don't know who. I'd like to follow up on the question that my colleague asked regarding the situation we find ourselves in without the appointment of one or two ethics commissioners. Now, if I've understood correctly, between today and the day this new person will be appointed, will there be a decision that need to be taken concerning an administrative monetary penalty, that you will put together the file and that the decision will be made upon the appointment of the new commissioner? Is that that's my understanding, but the work will continue nevertheless. Yes, that's correct. The work will continue, but our hands are tied until there is a new commissioner. But you're going to continue to conduct investigations, inquiries. We cannot conduct any investigations currently. We lay the groundwork, we do the preparatory work, but nothing can be started without a commissioner. Question, and so the new commissioner will take a decision upon their appointment and take advantage of the preparatory work that you've done, the groundwork that you've laid. Exactly. Thank you. As far as referrals to the Speaker of the House are concerned, that will occur when the new individual is appointed. Is that correct? Yes. And were there to be investigations called for, will the new appointee have an opportunity to start a new investigation when they're appointed? Yes, they will. But you will continue to prepare background information, options for the new individual who will fill that position. Response, yes. Now, in response to a question, you intimated that there is a window of opportunity, as we say in English. There's an opportunity over a 5-year period for certain objectives to be met and a 10-year time frame for other actions to be taken. Could you please clarify as to whether it be 5 or 10 years, in which cases? Well, the Commissioner has a period of up to 5 years to start an investigation, but can go back 10 years in their investigation as they try to gather facts on what has occurred. Could you please give us examples of decisions that have previously been released that are in line with that kind of scenario? I'm not aware of any. Well, I think that there are a couple of examples in the report. There's the after mandate period. So I do think that we have produced 1 or 2 reports because of that kind of situation. Thank you. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair, please? 1 minute, 8 seconds, 7 seconds, 6 seconds. The countdown is on. I've got it, Mr. Chair. Now, my last question, if I may. In your opinion, there's no appointee for the time being, but the work is ongoing, as you've confirmed. And I know, personally speaking, that I reached out and asked questions, and questions were asked by my representative, and I think that's a service that's offered to all parliamentarians. Response: yes, it is. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Monsieur Fergus, Monsieur Vilmier, 2 minutes et demi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Rushworth, you have eyes, you have ears, but you are deaf and blind and don't have limbs. Is that correct? Yes, that is true. Now, my colleague said that in the absence of a commissioner, the files will pile up. And let's say the subject of your investigation is no longer a member of parliament or a public office holder. What would occur?
Je ne suis pas absolument certaine.
I'm not sure exactly what would occur, but there's no issue with the fact that we don't currently have a commissioner, because it will be possible to conduct an inquiry and to continue the work of the organisation down the track upon the appointment of the new commissioner. But, you know, if there's no one to point the finger at, if there's no more person holding that public office, well, it's my understanding that we can still proceed with the investigation even though that individual is no longer holds that public office. In the absence of a commissioner, the files are piling up. I won't ask you how many, but this is, I know it depends on the government, but this can this go on for much longer without causing major problems? From an operational standpoint, the work continues. So there's no issue there per se. It's more an issue of the investigations which are stalled and other provisions of the Act. Well, obviously things pile up and you have a 5 to 10 year time frame, but you know, when that individual is appointed, they're going to arrive in their office and they're going to have this huge pile on the top of their desk. What are they going to do with that? How will they catch up? What is your recommendation? Well, obviously, we'd like someone to be appointed in short order, but it's not up to us. I understand that. But in your opinion, the sooner the better, as far as your operations are concerned. Well, it depends what kind of operations. Corporate services can continue doing what they're doing. But in terms of investigations, yes, absolutely, in terms of investigations. What do you think of the wage of the commissioner that has been cut by 25%? Will that have any ramifications when it comes to hiring future commissioners? Well, this is kind of above our pay grade, and I think it's a better question for the Privy Council office that is responsible for hiring commissioners. Well, you have 2 or 3 commissioners that have a similar wage, and then the fourth one has 25% less. Well,
2.5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. This question is for the conflict of interest and ethics folks that are with us here today, and whomever feels they want to take
Hang on,
this
Mr. Green. We don't see on our screen here. The video. There we go. Okay. No, you're gone again, and you're back. No, there you are. Okay.
Pressing too many buttons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. This question is for the folks from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Do you feel that you have enough financial and human resources to pursue examinations to the extent you feel is required?
Yes. So we were able to fulfill our mandate last year with a similar budget. We're only asking for a 2% increase this year, and we do feel that we can continue and fulfill our mandate this year with this amount.
I do note that in the appendix of the Office of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner's report, it is indicated that the actual spending for 2021-2022 was $6.57 million, an amount that's lower than the total spending authorities for which Parliament sought approval for that period, which was 6.8. Can you explain why the office spent less than the authorities last year?
The surplus last year was mostly due to salary. As I mentioned earlier, our budget is over 80% is for salaries. Therefore, we had some delays in staffing last year. We had a little bit of a higher turnover rate last year, so we had to fulfill these vacant positions, and that was mostly what caused the surplus last year.
And was funding received by your office last year carried over to this fiscal year?
No.
You weren't allowed to carry it over?
Well, we don't really have a need to carry it over. We also have a reserve of $100,000, and we think that would be plenty to fulfill our mandate this year.
Pursuant to Section 45 of the Act, you have reason to believe that a public office holder or former public office holder has contravened the Act. You can examine this matter on your own. How often are examinations launched on the initiative of the Commissioner?
Are you asking about the number of investigations that have been launched in the last couple of years?
Under the initiative of the Commissioner, yeah, on public office holders.
All examinations that are launched are under the authority of the Commissioner, but if you give me a moment, I'll check in my notes and see if I have the full number that were launched.
You can also submit them. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I was going to suggest that, Mr. Green, because
Thank you very much for that recommendation. We'll be happy to get back to you with that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rushworth. Thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes our round of questioning. Madame Belanger, Ms. Rushworth, and Ms. Tremblay, I understand that it's an unusual circumstance not to have the Commissioner before us in dealing with the main estimates, but I want to thank both of you for according yourselves very well, very knowledgeable in your responses, and on behalf of the committee, I want to say thank you, Ms. Belanger. Thank you as well. Looking forward to seeing what's coming, and hopefully some of the recommendations of the committee are part of that. So thank you so much. I'm going to dismiss the witnesses. There are a few issues of committee business, in particular the main estimates that we have to deal with here. So I am going to ask the committee whether we have unanimous consent to adopt all votes referred to the committee in one vote. Okay, we do have that on division. Mr. Green, you're good? Okay. Does this mean that all votes will be adopted on division, Mr. Barrett? That's our suggestion. Okay, so we've got Mr. Barrett's on division. So shall all votes be referred to the committee in the main estimates 2023-24 carry on division? And shall I report the main estimates 2023-2024 to the House on division? Sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that completes that part of our business. And Ms. Sachs, I understand you have a procedural motion that you'd like to put forward to the committee. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'll make it quick for colleagues. Ryan Turnbull will be joining us at committee for the near future, replacing MP Khalid. And I would like to request access to the digital binder so that he is able to access all the information we need to conduct business.
Okay, we're good. Renee, Matt, we're good? Okay, thank you. So noted, Madam Clerk. Okay, so that concludes today's meeting. I want to thank everyone. Thank you to our, I see Ms. Hepner's hand is up. Go ahead, Ms. Hepner.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move the motion that I gave notice of earlier today, if I could, if that's appropriate.
Ms. Hepner, it does require time. You put the motion on notice. And I'm just going to clarify with the clerk. I believe it's 48 hours before you can move that motion. So just give me a second, please.
Okay.
So it does, and this is not formally committee business, just so that we're clear. These are issues that we are dealt with and disposing at the end of the main estimates are not part of committee business. It's part of today's meeting. So unless I have unanimous consent to move that, to have Ms. Hepner move her motion that she placed on notice earlier, we won't be able to dispose of that today, is my advice.
Okay. It was my understanding that we were in committee business, and that's why I thought I had the leeway to move that motion.
Yeah, there was no indication of committee business that was put onto today's notice, Ms. Hepner. So we were just disposing of the issue of the main estimates. And then Ms. Sack had indicated to me that she had a procedural issue to insert Mr. Turnbull. We dealt with that. But unless I have unanimous consent at 10:45 at the end of the meeting here, I don't have unanimous consent. So the motion is on notice, and you'll be able to move it at the next earliest opportunity. Okay? Monsieur Villemure.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais avoir une...
Mr. Chairperson, an update, please, regarding Ms. Fournier's documents. Well, I did give you notice when we started this process, but suffice to say that the documents are with us. I think that the clerk will be able to now send those documents out to you by close of business today. There are two documents that we weren't able to send out. The first is a schedule of events drawn up by Ms. Fournier. We need to translate that particular document. And then the 160 pages, ATIP Globe and Mail, we will receive the two documents next week. But I have said to the clerk, if the dates are right, if the context is right, that regarding the documents Ms. Fournier is sharing with the committee, well, we will distribute those documents this afternoon. Inaudible? So, by way of our normal email account, yes, indeed. Excellent.
Everyone, have a great weekend, and the meeting is adjourned.